So it's lesson 11, part 3. So we've started unit testing with our products controller. We've written a couple of tests. We're testing that our index method does not return a null. And we're testing that it also returns a view called index. So for our next trick, we need to make sure that if we call the index method, that we get back a list of products. But we're not getting the products from SQL Server. We're getting the products from our in-memory database that we've created in our test initialize method. So we should get 3 products back that have these IDs, 46, 88, and 51 in this case. For me, your IDs might be different. So we'll create a new test method called index loads products. Because ultimately, this is why we have an index method. It's so that there's a place in our application where a user can get a list of the products. So as an administrator, I can see all the products here. So here's our method. So we want to act. And in this case, we're not just searching the result. We actually want to search something a little different. We actually want the model from the result. Right? If we go and look at our product index view for a minute, so our products index that we scaffolded, it has a model on line 1. What kind of model does our page get? It gets an IEnumerable, so a list of type product. So this is what we can check. We can inspect the model that comes back and make sure that that model has a list of products in it. So in this case, our result is going to be, we're going to cast it to a view result, controller.index.result. Whoops, sorry, got to use the brackets to call the method, .result. So then we're going to convert the result that comes back as a list of type product to our result.model. So we're going to get the view result, then get the model of that view. And now we can assert. So in this case, we're comparing 2 lists. The list of data we get back when we call the index method, and we want to compare it to our products variable, our mock list here. When we call the index method, we should get back the same list of products that we have in the database. So because we're comparing 2 lists, we don't use assert. We have a different version of assert called collection assert. So this is where we're checking something about a list. So we want to assert R equal. So what are we expecting? And what did we get? We are expecting our list of products, and we got back this variable here. Check product list we initialized is the same as the data from the index method. So we want to check if these are the same. Here's the test. So I want to run this test, see if it passes or fails. I'll go to my test explorer. So it finds our new test, index loads products. It didn't run. Why did it not run? I'm going to run all the tests. Yep, Diana, you're not alone. Okay, so my test failed. Why did it fail? An item with the same key has already been added. Key 300. Okay, so our test failed. Let's figure out what's wrong. So I think it's because I got save changes here. The save changes should happen only once down at the bottom. That's why. It's trying to add our category twice. Line 38, I can take out. I'll remove that in my test initializer. I think we only need to call save changes once down at the bottom. So I took out my first context save changes line. And I'll run all my tests again. You're talking about the category ID. You use different category IDs here? Okay. I'll try that and see if it makes a difference.
But then you have to change the your category when you create a category.
You know what? I think I know what the issue is. Right. We're creating these products each time. I think this is the reason. I can actually think I can change it here. It's because the database name is the same. I want to make this different every time. That's why it's reusing the same database, creating the same database. I think this will fix the problem. I tried to do it without. I'm going to make it so that my database, every time this runs, it gets a unique ID. And I just need to make a reference. I think this will fix the problem. can leave my category IDs. I can probably even save save changes back. I tried to hard code the name of the database. Each time it needs to have a unique ID. I'll try this. I'll put the code up in a minute. I'm gonna run my tests. Okay, so that fixes that error. So what did I do here? I changed my options, so my in-memory database always gets a unique name. That was the change I needed to make, was on this line. Everything else I could leave as before. So all my tests now work except for this one. It says element at index 0 don't match. So I got two lists of products, but my lists are not quite the same, saying the first product in the two lists is different. So it does fail. If I use a breakpoint, this is going to help me see what is in products and what is in data. Why are they not the same? So I'll put on a breakpoint and debug my test. And Diana already alluded to what the problem will be. So I'm going to run my test again. So now shows me I've got three items in the product list, 3 items in my data variable. That looks good. If I expand this, it shows me product 0, product 1, product 2. Product 0 in my list is product ID 46. But in my data variable, I also have 3 products, but product 88 is first, and product 46 is third. How come? So in my list, they're in order 46, 88, and 51. But when we call the index method, they're in order 88, 51, and 46. So we have the same products, but the test is failing. How come they're not in the same order? Just stop my debugger here. So our test almost works. Right. If we go and look at our products controller, not only are we getting the list of products, but in our return statement, we've added an order by name. So we have the same 2 lists, but they're in different orders because our method not only gets the products, but it also sorts them alphabetically by name. We haven't done that in our unit testing class. We have the products, but they're in order. They're not actually in any order at all. They're not alphabetical. They're not numeric either. So to fix our test, we need to sort the data. We need to add the order by and we'll need to make a reference in order to be able to use this kind of order by here. So it's going to want us to reference the link library, LINQ, so we can write this kind of filter on our query. I got to take out that space. And again, we'll convert to a list. So this should fix our test. Whoops, sorry, I put this in the wrong place. I apologize. This goes here. I'm sorry. We want to order our products that right now are not in any order and compare them to the results of our controller method where they're ordered. So I'll save this. And now I can try to run my test again. This time it should pass. And now I get a green check mark. So everything in here passes. If I use the code coverage tool in here, we can now see how much of the product controller is covered by unit tests. We've written 3 tests. Now, this doesn't exist if you have Visual Studio Community. If you have Professional or Enterprise, if I click on the test menu, I get this Analyze Code Coverage. Here's the completed test. I'll put it in the chat as well. So I'll open my code coverage. Yeah, you won't have it if you're not in, if you're in Community. And if I go to my Get Me a Game controllers, notice it says now, okay, we've covered 2.69% of all the controller code. But in the products controller, we've covered now almost 7%, and the index method is 100% covered. Everything that could happen in the index method is now covered by a unit test. And if I turn on the color coding and go back to our controller, you'll notice now that the code inside is blue because our index method has 3 unit tests and they all pass. So we're going to write a couple more tests around the details test, and then we're going to stop. We probably need 4 tests, as we talked about earlier. We should test if there's no ID. We should test if there is an ID, but that product doesn't exist. And then we could test if we have a valid ID. So we could probably do this in the amount of time we've got left. So I'm going to make a couple quick changes to the details method. Farouk, I'm going to ask you, what should we be doing on line 50? So where we're returning our view. Yeah, let's explicitly list that we are, say that we're returning the details view. Okay, so now we could write a test that calls details, passes in a valid ID, and checks that we get the details view coming back. Let's start with that test because it's almost the same as our index test, just a little bit different. So on your return statement, make sure you add the details as a string as our first parameter. Once we're done, we can go back to our test and we can create a test called details loads details view, something like that. So this test was index loads index view. So details loads details view. So we'll act and we'll assert. Var result equals, again, we'll get a view result back. controller dot. Now we want to test the details method. So what value should we provide? We want to get the details page loading. Right? We want it to load this page. Right, so we need an ID, but what value should we supply for an ID? What are our 3 valid values for the product ID in our mock database? So if we want the details page to load, we have to provide a proper product ID. No, we're not looking for the category. We're looking for a product based on the ID. So there's 3 product ID values in our mock database. What product ID numbers could I use? They're showing on my screen. Yeah, the actual number. Right, right. So if we pass in any one of these numbers, we should get the details view, right? Because those are the valid IDs. So let's pass in, let's say, 88. Dot result. So if we call details and pass in 88, we should get the details view being loaded. So we're going to compare the result view name to the string details. We're saying if 88's passed in, this should be, the details view should load. Or we could try 46 or 51. Those would be the only 3 numbers. Actually, I'll just maybe change the name of this. Loads details view with, I'll say, valid ID. 46, 81, or 55 only. As these are the IDs of the mock products. Test. So any other number is going to cause this test to fail. So I can just right-click it and say run my tests. Lots of different ways to execute your unit tests. Go to my test explorer. And our details loads view with a valid ID. It passes. If I put in 46 and run it again, it should pass. Or 51, it should also pass. If I put in any other number, the test will fail. I'll try it with each of these. And then I'm going to try a different number. I'm going to deliberately break it. Okay, so my test passes. If I put in 52, however, and run my test, my test now fails. Because if we put in 52, something else happens in the method. Right? It doesn't get down here. only gets down here if ID is one of the ones in the database. So this is actually good. That's what we expect. I'll just put that back. Whoops. So let's test these couple other scenarios now. We said at the beginning, when we look at the details, so there's our completed test. I want to then see what happens if we test with no ID, or we should have a test that checks we have an ID, but that ID is not found. When we query the database based on that ID, we don't get anything. So we'll write these two more tests and we will call it a day. So we'll say details, no ID, returns not found. Okay, so if we don't provide an ID right now, Visual Studio returns a 404 not found response. But as Diana rightly pointed out, in the browser, we're getting a blank screen. So again, here's a chance for our unit testing to improve our code. Right now in my products, if I go here, we've got a few products in our web project. Right, but I've only got like one product ID, 1, 12. So I can load product 11, but I can't load like product 111. This just gives me a blank screen, which is kind of lousy. So we actually have an error page built in. It's under shared. We've got this layout file. An error file. Just shows error. So let's change our method here. Instead of just returning a not found, we'll comment that out and we'll say return view error. So if there's no ID, we want to load an error page. We could create another 404 page, but we have a generic error page already. We haven't used it. So comment out the return not found. And let's try to return the error view instead. I'm not 100% this is going to work, but we're going to try it. So now in our test, I guess we can change this to say no ID returns error view. Use any ID. Oh, sorry. We don't need an ID. Var result equals we'll put in a null. So we're calling details, but we're not providing a product ID. So this should generate an error. So we're checking that the name of the view is called error. So if we call the details method, but there is no ID at all, we should show an error. We'll run the test and see what happens. So I'll go to Test Explorer. Details no ID returns our error view. Oh, sorry, and this is failing because I didn't put it in as 81. So my unit test here failed as well. So now in the browser as well, we fixed our code because before I got this. So if I run it now with no ID, oh, there's an error on our error page, which I'm going to delete. So it is loading the error page, but the error page has an error in it. I'm just going to take out this little section on line 9. This is actually the error page some of you have seen on Azure. I'll take out that block. So now if I go to product details, so now I get this general error page, which I can customize. So this is actually kind of like test-driven development, right? By writing a test, we fix the code in the controller. Because before the controller would give us just a blank page. Now at least we get an error page that has our header and footer we can navigate around. So we need to do the same thing. This will be the last test we'll write today. If I put in a product ID that doesn't exist, we want to do the same thing. Instead of simply returning, instead of just returning a 404 response, but giving the user a blank page, let's take them to the actual error page. And then we can write a unit test for this as well. We have an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in our database. So we'll go back to the products controller. So which line number should I change next? This will be the last thing we do today. You got it, Maggie. So I'm going to, again, comment out 48. We don't just want to return a 404 status. Again, we want to return the view called error. Exactly. And now we can write a test, something like details invalid ID loads error. I'm going to copy this previous unit test because it's almost the same. I'm going to call it details invalid ID returns error. So I just have to make one change here. What do we change to run this unit test? So here we passed in a null. We had no ID. In this test, we have an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in the product table. So what line should we change here to simulate that condition? Yeah, and what would be a value? Give me a value we could use instead of the null. What would be a product ID that would trigger an error? Yeah, anything other than 46, 81, or 55. Yep, 111, anything. And so I save it, run my test. Actually rerun all my tests to fix up. Not sure why that test is. Why did I get an error? Oh, because my ID is 88. So until I put in an 88 here, my valid test is going to pass. I got my IDs wrong. So my unit test is working as it should. I'll run it again. That'll clean it up. Okay, so now my test passed. So a valid test uses 88, 46, or 55. If we have no ID, we get the error. If we have an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in the database, we also get an error. So now if I refresh this page where I put in an invalid ID, so by writing the unit testing, it's helping us write better code. Even though I know we didn't write this code in the controller, Visual Studio wrote it, but we're cleaning it up and making it better. We shouldn't give users a blank screen if they leave out the ID or they give an ID that doesn't exist. We should be showing them an error page that's formatted properly. So the unit testing is helping identify these gaps. And if I look, now if I run my code coverage again, if you don't have community, unfortunately you can't refresh the code coverage, which is annoying. If I do it again, now in my controller, so our products controller now, details is also 100% covered. So we went from about 3% coverage in the controller to 7%, but both index and details, we've now covered all the code, and you can see everything's blue. Now we'd probably need one more test because we never actually checked that we got the matching product back. I'm not even going to worry about that for today. Okay. I think you get the idea, hoping starting to get the idea from the, how many tests? The 8 tests that we've written. So for your assignment, just to review, you would need to, it's not required, Farouk, it's a useful tool, so you don't have to go ahead and do that. Yeah, that's fine. It just helps you when you're writing your unit tests. So we didn't test all of these methods. So for your assignment, what do you have to do? Again, just to put the assignment in context. Unit test one controller in your assignment, not both, not more than one, just one. So I picked the products controller. In there, in your unit test, you have to set up a unit test project and a unit test class. You'll need to create an in-memory database and some mock data for whatever controller you're testing. So again, I'll come back to Maggie's project and example. So if Maggie wants to unit test the movies controller, you will create, let's say, 3 mock movies in your database. Okay? You shouldn't be doing a products controller. And then what unit tests do you need to write? You pick any one of so you can't do unit tests for index and details. We've done those together. And I'm going to publish all my unit tests to GitHub, so you're going to have all of those. So you pick one of the other methods in the controller, one of the create, edit, or delete methods, and you write the unit tests that you need to cover the code in that one method. So most of your work is actually in the setup. Adding the dependencies, creating the unit test project, creating your mock in-memory database. And then you'll write, so all you'll need is 3 to 5 unit tests to complete the assignment. So you're not unit testing index, you're not unit testing details. You pick one of these 6 methods and write the appropriate tests you need. So you'll need somewhere between 3 and 5 tests. And as we did in class, wherever there's a return view, you're going to explicitly make sure the return statement has the name of the view. You'll have to add this. Okay, so there is a quiz. There is the assignment. If you have time, do them today. That way also you can book for an appointment tomorrow or Thursday if you need help with it. Okay, I'm going to push everything up to GitHub. I will upload the videos. Do have availability this week if you have questions. You can also send me an email if you need help. Okay, so do not unit test the whole project. One method only. Whatever tests that method needs, you need to write. I will push today's code. And please let me know if you need help. Okay, so we're just giving you a snippet of unit testing, and I want you to try this on your own with your own project. That's it for today. I hope